And I won't stop until I start to stand out.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the world's happiest podcast. We are the LorcanaCast team, and we are going to have a ton of fun in this episode talking about trading card game releases. We are about to see set 2 for Lorcana release, Rise of the Floodborn, this Friday. So this episode is going to be airing on Wednesday, November 15th. And set 2 is supposed to launch on the 17th, so 2 days from the launch of this episode. And our team is here to talk about trading card games, Lorcana, set releases, things we love, things we may or may not like, things we hope for, and just kind of go down memory lane of some of the trading card games that brought us together and brought us here to Lorcana, which is super exciting. So with us in the booth, we've got Gregathy. What is up, my man?
How's it going?
Hey, we're good. We have got Chris Bates. How are you, my man?
What up? Good to be back.
Yeah, good to have you back. And James Reimer, how are you, my friend?
I'm awesome. Excited to stay put. I'm done traveling for a while.
So we are going to just jump right in and have a great time. So I'm going to kick it over to James because you are absolutely our local Lorcana man who has been traveling, played some Lorcana with other people in another state, did some multiplayer. And I just love to hear some of your thoughts on like the current state of Lorcana, what you're excited about for Rise of the Floodborn, and just kind of your thoughts on, all this exciting stuff that's going to be happening in just a few days.
Definitely. So to set the scene, there I was Friday night. I got back in from New Orleans, week-long work trip, and I should have been looking for my bed, but instead I decided to go to Lorcana Locals. Anyways, but to my surprise, I was one of 3 Lorcana players there that night, surrounded by an army of Magic players for the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, I believe is what it's called. Yeah. So literally like 3 people for Lorcana, like 40 for Magic. Luckily, we were all pretty exhausted and delusional from working that week, and so we were all laughing. We were saying some funny things, like referencing Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, I'll attack your life points directly, even though we're playing Lorcana. Like, we were having a good time. And ultimately, I think it got me thinking about just like the current state of Lorcana in my area, which is like the outskirts of Atlanta. There's some great things and there's some not so great things. And I think it's going to get better over time. But one of the great things I'll say is we had a recent restock. I don't know if anybody's gotten to benefit from that, but some of the great things that come out of the restock, basically product getting back on the shelves, at least for a day or two. TCG player prices dropped tremendously. So, for example, booster boxes for the first set were going for around $300+ a box, which is ridiculous. The MSRP is $150. Now we're seeing that around about $230, which is closer to MSRP. Not quite there yet, but we'll get there eventually. And even better, the singles dropped. So, for example, Tinkerbell Giant Fairy, which is one of the best cards, most playable cards of the set, that was about $25 a month ago, and now it's going for about $12 a copy. So now we're starting to see like the game become more accessible. And Ravensburger is definitely learning from the underestimating of the first set, basically, where they thought, oh man, we don't know if people are going to like this game, and they underprinted it. And they realized very quickly that no, people love this, they want this, and now we're starting to see them catch up to the demand. Any thoughts on the price drops, or just like seeing the restock actually affect the market before I jump into other things?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's really awesome to see this game becoming more accessible. It's, it was kind of tough for me to justify getting more cards in the early days, because I remember I was considering dropping 160 on a playset of Maleficent Monstrous Dragons, but it's because I was building Sapphire Ruby, so like with the ramp shell, and it's like, do I really want to be dropping this kind of money on a deck that's like tier 2 at best, So I didn't want to go full Ruby Amethyst, but I did like the ramp package. That was one of the first things that was revealed that seemed to have worked well with the Ruby kind of high end. But now that Maleficent Dragon's sitting around $22, it's like the one thing that's missing from that shell for me. So I'm feeling a lot more enticed nowadays. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad to see more product on the shelves because it's opening up that accessibility for the player base. That's something that Lorcana has really struggled with over the past few months. And people who want to play have a great opportunity to play because we've got set 1 that's hitting the shelves or has hit the shelves. Set 2 is about to hit the shelves. And then we're supposed to get another reprint next year as well. So Lorcana hopefully is going to see an influx of more new people, more new players, more casual folks, and people being able to get their hands on the product that they're really excited about. So yeah, I think that we're in a really good time to see growth.
I think that's a good question, right? With more on the way, when do we think the best time to to kind of go in on more cards is? Do you think it's later with set 2 in the picture as well?
I think it's honestly right now, I think we're still in the pro players are going to be the meat of this game, unfortunately, until I think Q2 2024, which is around the timeline of the rolling out of the official competitive circuit and the fan events that Ravensburger's talked about. I think that's when this game is truly going to start to shine. I think until then, we're still going to have a bit of a struggle of, casual players maybe not being the main people coming out and playing like we thought. At least in my current environment, we started off the season of Chapter 1 with let's say 20 plus people at one of my bigger locals playing Lorcana. And a lot of those were new TCG players who weren't really playing. To about right now, you're kind of seeing sort of just the pro Magic players left playing the game every week. And you might see an occasional casual player pop up. And I think that's between a couple of different things. I think we've been sort of setting the tone of Lorcana at the moment to be kind of another, competitive TCG as opposed to a casual family-friendly TCG that anybody should be able to show up to the store and play. And that's mostly because I think the 1Ks, 2K events, everything's sort of centered around money. I'll even say I think at my locals, we sort of incentivized winning. And there was a bit of the rich get richer scenario, right? Where in order to get packs, you had to win. And so you couldn't just walk up and say, hey, let me buy a pack for $5 or $6. You had to say, let me enter the tournament, let me hopefully top, and let me hopefully walk away with a couple packs. And so what that does create is sort of you have these pro players showing up who played other TCGs. They're building their $600 decks, and the casual players are showing up with their starter decks with a couple, upgrades. And they're unable to break through and win a pack. So then they're kind of stuck, right? I can't buy a pack. I can't win a pack. What do I do? And I think a lot of that's going to get improved between the competitive and fan events. I think we're going to actually see official events that aren't centered around money to draw people in, especially casual players. I think Pokemon does this really well, where you just show up to these events, you earn points, you go to regionals, nationals, worlds. It starts to feel like you're kind of gamifying the kind of the action of showing up and just having a good time, as opposed to saying I have to win to get my money back. That's no longer the incentive. And then I think more products, is going to fix a lot of things. And I'll throw out one more suggestion before opening up to the room. I think one other thing that's going to really help close the gap, and hopefully it's sort of in their kind of in their window or their scope for future product. I think we need more competitive structured deck as sealed products. Right now we have starter decks, but I guess once you learn how to play, those don't really hold up very much. And I'll give you an example of just Magic and Pokemon handling this really well. With Magic, with Commander becoming the main format people are playing, most people can really just show up to their locals, buy a pre-con of the new set, and feel like they can sit at the table, shuffle up, and actually play and not feel like they're getting trampled. Same with Pokemon. I don't know if anybody follows Pokemon on the team necessarily, but
League battle decks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, just to be completely straight up, Mew VMAX has been a reigning champion for a couple of years now. They even just won the world championship, that deck. And the fact that you can walk up to a Walmart or a Target and Timmy can go buy the Mew VMAX deck for $30, that's creating such a lower barrier to entry to say, hey, I can actually buy this deck off the shelf, add some upgrades to it, and compete somewhat with the competitive players who are actually optimizing day in, day out. And I think Lorcana is going to need that in the next 6 months or so to really help let little Timmy, little Tanya walk into the store, buy something off the shelf, and actually shuffle up and play at locals and feel like they have a chance to win. I'll finish by saying a core principle of game design is that in order for everybody to have fun, everyone has to feel like they have a shot of winning. That's why games like Mario Kart incorporate the blue shells and stuff. It's no matter how good you are at drifting around the corners, there's always a way to balance it out to make it feel like the person in 8th place can still win. And I think Lorcana, especially with the audience it's trying to appeal to, is going to need a little bit more of that so that you can just basically show up, invest your $50 and actually feel like you can compete with the person who spent $500.
Yeah, I was actually pretty surprised at first when Lorcana didn't implement a rubber band type mechanic, kind of like that Mario Kart thing that you mentioned, because Ryan Miller's Steve Warner have worked on Kaijudo and Duel Masters, which has the shield triggers in that game, so that's their kind of rubber band, and the more damage you take, the more cards you get, sort of thing. So interesting to kind of think about how we can have that rubber band mechanic with what's currently existing in Lorcana. Maybe there's going to be like future design space for like if there's a big enough lore difference and you know some crazy effect happens, or like maybe like a V-Star once per game sort of like comeback sort of thing. But you know that's neither here nor there. That might be a future discussion. But I think one of the big things I want to add to James's point here is that definitely League Battle decks will be very helpful. But I think also designing more like set specific kind of like archetypes or decks that like work within just the single set. So of course this isn't going to be a huge problem right now just because we're only going on set 2. But of course the dwarves archetype with Snow White that we talked about recently, it's really great to think about because a lot of the shell is going to be coming from set 2. But yeah, if you think about kind of like maybe defining archetypes in Lorcana, like cards that only work within this like specific shell of a deck, but making sure that the barrier to entry is lower for these newer players. So like imagine set 5 is out, right? And it's like, all right, well, let me follow this deck list. And it's just like a good stuff package. And it's like, okay, well, I got to get these 13 cards from the first chapter, you know, these 12 cards from Rise of the Floodborn. And then, of course, these other, you know, good cards that come out in set 3, set 4, set 5, right? And so like kind of reining in the design of the game to kind of introduce these like decks that could be designed or played within the singular set is also going to be a great way to kind of keep players getting into the game and also have player retention going forward as well.
Totally. And I think even on top of the dwarves package we're seeing in set 2, the Madam Mim and Merlin package is sort of its own deck as well. Like you could basically just build off of all of the purple cards or amethyst cards in the set, and hopefully not need too much else from outside of it to be able to build an actual viable deck out of.
Yeah, time will tell to see if what ends up just being really good in set 2, if it's just going to be like set 1 decks with upgrades. But part of me thinks that's going to happen, but of course I'm excited to see how it's going to shake out.
Totally. I'm actually on the same page with you. I think there might be 1 or 2 archetypes that sneak out of this that are like brand new. Otherwise, I think it's going to be sort of upgrading things we have right now.
Yeah, because Amber Steel, it just seems like there are cards that are like designed for that deck. It's like they knew it was good and they wanted to make it better.
Yeah, like the Steel Cinderella. It's like, oh my gosh, they knew Steel Song was a thing. Like that card goes right into it.
New set releases are always a tough thing, right? Because you don't want the power creep so much that you invalidate the first set, right? Yeah. But you also want to make the second set relevant. So it's a really tough thing for designers to get right about how do you encourage people to buy in the new set, but also keep buying the old set, right? So it'd be interesting to see how Lorcana handles that, if there's a good balance there, because you want to sell both sets at this point because you just restock set 1 too.
Yeah, it's really that Goldilocks approach of like finding the porch that's like just right in that sense.
Right.
Mons Johnson has talked about this, who really big designer at Wizards R&D, and he is talking about kind of like he calls it inflation, but it's basically just power creep. And it's like, that's bad, because it's unsustainable over the course of a very long time. But then also, interestingly, is like the inverse, where it's like when you don't design good enough cards and there's like no reason to buy the new set, where it's like nothing is good whatsoever. And it's like, all right, well, no one plays them, no one buys them. You don't have turnover, you don't have change within the game, and that's also bad, So it's like, yeah, really reining in that Goldilocks situation where it's like you have to make sure that it's just right in terms of design.
Right.
Well, actually, on that topic, I'd love to hear how the rest of the teams, like their past experience with other set releases, like other games that have basically launched, and how that felt sort of on day 1, set 1, set 2, set 3. Let's dive into some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could talk about Flesh and Blood. Its set releases were similar to what Lorcana's experienced somewhat now. So Flesh and Blood, as we talked about before on this podcast, came out in 2019, right before the pandemic. So the first set was released in 2019, right when the second set, Arcane Rising, was coming out, the pandemic hit. So it's a little different in that sense that to take what I'm saying with a grain of salt somewhat, because there was a global pandemic happening when the game was released, and we thought the game was never going to take off because of that. It did weather that, surprisingly. But again, the first set, and then it doesn't, Flesh and Blood doesn't have the IP backing of Disney, right? It doesn't have all these great, this great history of IP to support it. So the first set was extremely small. Welcome to Wraith was, like just had a cult following, really, about people that knew about it, people that stores that supported it. It was not big at all. And so that's the second set. I think the rumor is, I don't know if we know the exact numbers anymore, but we think they doubled the amount box they produced. And that's really, again, still was pretty hard to find. It got pretty expensive. But again, people were able to get it, especially since the pandemic hit and people weren't really playing that much. The third set is really what things got crazy, because the third set for Flesh and Blood, and Flesh and Blood has a model where they have these supplemental sets. So the third set was there were no new heroes released, so no new real. In that sense, it wasn't a power boost to create new parts of the game. You know, it wasn't new mechanics really introduced. It was this set supplemented the first two sets, right? So it was just cards that supported all existing archetypes in the game. And that's really when, for whatever reason, like it hit the collectors market, which I think is kind of where I in my mind, I think Lorcana started with, right? Like the collectors were really hitting the ground hard in Lorcana because everybody loves the IP. They want to buy all these boxes. They want to have these cards. But for whatever reason, people in the third set of Flesh and Blood just started hoarding boxes. Like all these collectors just bought them all up right away. Again, it was, government stimulus money. I don't know what was happening, but like it was the middle of the pandemic. I don't know if people had extra money, but they bought out all of the third set.
That 2021 market was weird.
Yeah.
It was
like,
strange.
it just, I mean, like the boxes were, were going for like $500, $600 and like crazy amounts. Right. So just like that, at that point, people found out about Flesh and Blood. That's how people found out. Like, what is this crazy game that nobody could buy at this point? Because all the first two sets were sold out, and now this third set, is selling for these crazy amounts. And is a game that really that good, or people just buying it because, they have nothing else to do? Like what's going on? So that's kind of like that history reflects back in some ways to me to Lorcana, but a little bit reverse, because I think collectors have really hit Lorcana hard. It's in addition to people that want to play, the game, and professional players and people that want to get ready for actually playing money tournaments, all that kind of stuff. So you have both things going on with Lorcana, where it took some time for Flesh and Blood to get into that. Luckily, by the fourth set, or like depending on who you were, what you did, Monarch was historically Flesh and Blood. Like people know about that like the set where price just tanked, right? So it was a really interesting point where because they printed a ton of Monarch, which is what Ravensburger's going to do. That's what breaks this. Like you have to print way more than you need, because that you have to flood the market, and that's what Flesh and Blood did. And people, I remember still opening up packs of Monarch, and then the prices were inflated because of the third set. And so we were selling these cards the first week of opening for crazy amounts. But then people realized, oh crap, there are way too many boxes of this stuff. So people were you see TCG player, everything, cards just going up there. And then prices just took a dive, and they've never, and now, and that's when the game got in the hands of players, right? That's when people were able to actually go to TCG player, buy singles, get decks, get into the game, and really learn the game, and actually learn it's a great game. But I think that's, in my, hearing Gregor 3, hearing James talk, that's what I think Lorcana's going to need, is really, I don't know what happens with set 2 or happens at set 3 when it happens, but really the market just needs to be oversaturated to a certain point for this to get the collectors to back away and get the players in the game.
Yeah, I love how we're just rolling with me being Gregathy now, but yeah, let's go with it. But yeah, I mean, definitely, right? Just making sure that cards are accessible to players is just going to go such a long way for your game, right? Because it's you need to have people that are actually playing the game, because it's called a trading card game, right? It's
right.
It's meant to be played. These are collectible cards, but that's how it goes.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back after this. Thank you so much for joining us here on this episode. If you want to help support the show, you can follow us on X or Facebook at LorcanaCast, as well as leave a review on your favorite podcast aggregate. This helps your friends know about the awesome content you're listening to and grow and build this amazing community that we have. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to get right back into the show. All right, and we are back with the second half of this episode, and I want to kick it back to Chris Bates, because not only has he brought up a really good point. Lorcana is a brand new trading card game, and it's kind of going through those very similar, those growth and birthing pains as a new trading card game. You're trying to print enough product so that people can get their hands on it, but not so much product that the game is worthless and sitting in warehouses not selling. But at the same point, you have a second set coming out, but you want to make sure people are buying your product without ostracizing them and making set 2 more powerful than set 1. And there's this really difficult balance of a insurmountable amount of variables that players may or may not know or even care about. A lot of people want to purchase a product, have fun with the product, and we may or may not be aware of all of the details and hard work that go in on the back end. And what we're seeing with Lorcana is a part of that process. But there are other trading card games that have done the exact same thing and gone through the exact same birthing pains. And one of them we're going to talk about now that we're all kind of interested in is Sorcery TCG. So tell us a little bit about that, Chris.
Yeah, so Sorcery Contested Realms is the name of the game. And the first thing I'll say is this game is not for everybody. Which I think is interesting in the market these days, where I think obviously they want to be successful. They want to sell their game. They want people to play the game. But they've made they've been very upfront about what they are and what they will be, which is not going to be a super competitive, have tournament scene, they do the whole flesh and, like, some ways in that sense, the opposite of Flesh and Blood, where there's not going to be a world necessarily, or like this whole pro quest circuit, all this kind of stuff. They really are focused on, fun, that tabletop experience. The first thing you'll notice about the game is the art is amazing, in my opinion, but I could definitely see that it's not again typical of Lorcana or Magic these days, or Flesh and Blood. It is all hand painted art. It really harkens back to early Magic Gathering days, where they used a lot of, I believe all that was hand painted at that point, but really like they're revised, and all those first few sets of Magic hand painted art that really sticks out. Inversely, there is, like Magic these days is so, like, the whole set has to match and have a similar theme, right? So the cards in this game don't really, I think they have a theme, but again, it's all hand painted art, so it's not really a cohesive theme. It just looks all great individual pieces of art put together. On top of that, the other unique thing is the model is they're doing one set a year. That's the goal, one big set a year. It is a trading card game, but the first set is about 400 plus cards. It also had this growing pain, we just talked about a couple minutes ago, where they kickstarted it. So I think they made like 4 million or some great amount of money on Kickstarter, but that still is a very small amount of people that actually got the first set of the game. So the beta just released. We're recording earlier, but the beta released the week of November 9th. And the beta should be available most places. I know in Minnesota, where I am, a lot of game stores have it. I'm a big fan of Team Covenant. If any of you guys, if we want to plug somebody, they give us some ad money someday too. But Team Covenant has their website. But again, if what I'm saying like rings to you at all, definitely check it out. Sorcery Contested Realms also has so it's addition to like a normal, having your avatar on the board, trying to do 20 damage to the other person, that kind of stuff, summoning minions, casting spells, all that kind of good stuff. It also has a physical part to the game. It's played on a board of 4x5 grid, where you actually put your mana or your sites, as they call them, physically on the board, and that's the land. You create a land and you play the game where your monsters and where everything will be fighting at. So there's also this physical, directional, tactile part of the game as well. So again, me and my local play group have a blast playing it, opening packs up. I got the full collection, the full set already. I'm not ashamed to say. So I'm really excited to just sit down and make some decks, and not worry about going into a tournament or worry about, having to play it every week or anything like that. Just playing what I want to play. Have fun with it.
Yeah, I really do like that grid-based approach to it. I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
And I really wish more trading card games would actually start using it. One of the Japanese trading card games I really like is called Zillions of Enemy X, and it's played by a 3x3 on a 3x3 grid that's shared between you and your opponents. So it's kind of like tic-tac-toe with cards.
Yeah.
But Sorcery also, kind of seems to scratch that similar itch, which you said it's 4x5.
Yes, for sure.
Right?
Yep, 4x5.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it seems to be a bit more tactical on that end, where 3x3, there's only really so many places you
Right.
can place cards. But yeah, 4x5, I'd imagine there's like kind of that chess-based element where it's like positioning really matters, or like Plants vs. Zombies, whatever kind of grid-based game you want to compare it to, right? But it's like, yeah, really like the placement of your cards, I'd imagine, really contributes a lot to you eventually winning the game, or like
right. And it's again the standard rule of the game. Obviously, cards change all the rules of the game, right? That's the golden rule. But the standard rules of the game, you're only going to be able to move on the site you put down, right? So like depending on how, and you in placing a site, putting a physical location on the board usually takes your action for your avatar that turn. So you can still summon other monsters, or whatever, but like usually either you do your special ability or you put a piece of land on the board. So like depending on what kind of deck you are, if you're a control deck or whatever, you might want to, kind of corner off part of the board and like try to protect it while you send your minions off to try to get over to the other side of the board, that kind of stuff. Or sometimes you want to just like put down 1 or 2 pieces of land and rush over to the other side, right? The one part I haven't said, and I don't want to go into all the rules because that would be too long, but the point of the game is to take your opponent's health down to 20, from 20 to 0. And you do that by doing damage, but you can actually attack your opponent's land. So the sites they put out. So if they put a site near you, there's a movement part where your monsters can move 1 square and then attack. So you could just attack their land and do that damage until they take the 20 damage, and they're what's called death's door. At that point, either a monster has to directly hit their avatar, or you have to cast a spell and hit their avatar, something like that. So the death's door part, I found out, like playing our local games, really changes the course of the game, because obviously you can like block, intercept, all this other kind of stuff, all these other mechanics. But it really becomes a game of like, can you position, like that chess match, can you position yourself where you get that person at death's door? And even then you got to figure out, well, how am I actually going to hit them, right? Because it's pretty easy to hit their sites depending on how they put the land out, but it can be hard if they go to the corner. How am I going to get to them? How am I going to close the game out? So that part really is like 2 games of 1 in that sense.
Yeah. And I would love for you to kind of illuminate us a little bit about the release of beta, because alpha, again, we're talking about Lorcana kind of as the pivotal idea of set 1 is still kind of hard to find. Set 2 could change the ability to find Lorcana. Set 3 should improve over time. And we want to make sure people are aware that trading card games have these birthing pains, but we've also got other games we can look at and go, this game, Flesh and Blood, they had a problem. They fixed it. They're super successful. Sorcery, they had some problems. They fixed it. Now they're doing extremely well, yada, yada, yada. And just kind of remind people that although Lorcana might have some birthing pains right now, as long as they just keep doing better and improving and producing more stuff, Lorcana's going to be super easy to get your hands on by, 2024. Like, we want to make sure people have hope, because Lorcana is a great game, and it's just going to take a little bit of time to get that product into the hands of all the people, casual players, collectors, tournament players, families, friends, all of the above.
And the scale of magnitude that Lorcana is experiencing is, I would venture to say, no other TCG has experienced before, right? I don't know any other TCG coming out that like with their first set hitting Target and Walmart like that, right? So like you got to think that like even like Magic and Pokemon, all these places, they didn't start at commercial stores like that, right?
No.
Like they worked their way up, like, but Lorcana started there. So obviously they have really experienced people at the helm. Obviously, as we've been talking about for a year and a half now, like this IP is everything in our culture. Is so strong. And I think I've mentioned other episodes in the past that like what a casual player really means. And I was talking about what James was talking about earlier. To me, a casual player really is somebody that may not even show up to weeklies, right? A casual player, like for these companies, they sell most of their product to, when they get to that Target stage or that Walmart stage, to people that just grab them packs off the shelf because it looks cool, right? Buying a couple packs for the kids,
and they play it. Yeah,
that's what they want.
Yeah,
they're making most of their money out. They're not making their money off for tournament grinders, guys. Like, because we spend our money, we spend $1,000 or whatever it costs to get a set, but like they need, obviously they get your money and then you have all your cards, you're done. They want people to be going to Target every week and grabbing packs. So it really is, it needs to hit that point where, and I think Lorcana more than other people, they really need to get the mindset they need to flood the market, because again, they shouldn't, and I think Lorcana feels this way. If I could, based on their previous actions, like they're not really worried about the collectors, right? Because if they were about the collectors, they would have done an alpha and beta set. They would have done something like that, right? They didn't do that. They didn't make that those first printing cards any more valuable than second printing cards. Yeah. So I think in that respect that they should be more willing to take that risk to like get as much product that they can out there to get in the players' hands and to get on those shelves so the game is known and people see it and people want to grab packs for the kids.
Yeah, although inadvertently, it seems like there is some printing differences between the first and second set. So, maybe despite some best efforts, we'll see how that shakes out.
And of course, people always be saying, "Oh, the first set was better." The second, I mean, you have an interest to do that, right? Because that makes the stuff you have in your house more valuable, right? Of course, those people that ordered the first set, right? They're going to be like, "Oh, our printing had a better
my copy of Poison Apple has a slightly darker shade of red." It's
all that stuff. We know that. There. So again, we're here to tell you people listening to this podcast, don't buy into that stuff. That is not, maybe in 20 years, maybe it'll make a difference. I would not worry about that at this point. I would do whatever I could to pay a reasonable price, MSRP, to get your product and hopefully it's up to Ravensburger to fix this problem of not having enough product out there.
Well, yeah, personally, when it comes to that printing stuff, I'm just hoping that eventually, like, the print runs are so inconsistent that it'll just be hard to tell.
Consistency is the key.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Like, at this point, it's like the wise word of advice is just like, whatever you did at the factory to keep these inconsistent, keep it going. Right. Keep them guessing, right? Like, just so there's like this clear, like, shadowless situation where it's like, okay, well, this is, But definitely interesting. If I may, I want to pivot a little bit over to kind of the Bandai trading card games and their launches, because this is, I guess, the shining ray of hope for all the Lorcana players that, are, perhaps a little bit underwhelmed by the launch or wishing they got to find more product, because most Bandai launches, with one exception, which is the stinker, I'll get into that one, Battle Spirit Saga, but most Bandai launches actually had the same exact problem, which is just, the typical business economics principle of too much demand, not enough supply. The boxes go up way much in price. And that happened for both the Digimon trading card game, which released stateside in 2021, and the most recent One Piece trading card game, which released stateside in late 2022. Kind of the similar story that you've probably heard throughout all of this, kind of the flesh and blood story as well. But, Digimon booster boxes were going upwards of $200, which the MSRP is somewhere in the 80s. Same thing with One Piece. And of course, listeners will probably be happy to hear that the supply issues have sorted themselves out for both games, and it didn't really take them too long to do it. So currently in One Piece, we're on OPO 4, which is Kingdoms of Intrigue. That box you can buy for around $80 on TCG Player, which is a little bit under MSRP. That shakes out to around $3.33 per pack. And so, we're back to MSRP on One Piece, and we'll see how long it takes to kind of break the stigma, but I'd imagine many card game players haven't touched One Piece, where it's like, oh, that's that game that's like really expensive because it's tied to a popular anime franchise. And it's like, yeah, that once was true. It's coming back down to earth now. And so, I have no doubt in my mind that Ravensburger is actually going to be able to turn the tide on this one and be able to have that product availability.
Agreed. Yeah, you could tell they're listening. They're listening. They're trying to put out press releases. They're very quickly learning from the early underestimating of how this was going to go on day one. And they're like, oh no, people want this, and they're making changes fast. Obviously, they can't make a printer print faster. That's going to take months to happen. But I think by early next year, you're going to start to see it maybe hit that One Piece area where things are closer to MSRP. People can actually find it on the shelves at a store. And there's no longer this fear of like, oh, that's that expensive game that I can't play. So I'm excited about that. For sure.
Yeah, right. And like, I think one thing that's also interesting, and one thing I've heard echoed throughout the community for a while, is like, oh, print this set into the ground, which is not really a notion that I am too in favor of as well, because it's like, whether or not people want to admit it or not, they want their cards to have some sort of value. And then overprinting is also an issue, as Suge, I think, has mentioned earlier in this podcast as well, where it's like having too much unmoving inventory is how businesses go out of business, right? So it's like we don't want to have that issue either. And I feel like that serves as kind of a perfect segue into the other stinker of a card game that Bandai has released. I think that this is a case of kind of Icarus, the Legend of Icarus, and flying too close to the sun. But Bandai, I think well-intentioned, they were on a kick with One Piece, which is perhaps one of the most popular anime of all time. Digimon, which is kind of a cult classic, has a cult following for, you know, kind of the fans that were too cool for Pokemon growing up, and they decided.
Wait, hey, what are you saying? What are you saying?
They decided to go for the slightly edgier, more edgy option, and of course,
but they're both good. They're different.
I mean, they're both great.
To my parents, they were all the same thing. You're playing
Oh,
Pokemon, you're playing Pokemon.
man. Why you gotta bring my mom into the conversation like so perfectly?
As a side note, has anyone seen that playmat where it's Ash Ketchum having a dual disc with an Agumon by his side?
Yes, I have.
But yeah, exactly. To James's mom, that's the image that plays in her head. I'm trying to compare all these franchises together. But yeah, Battle Spirit Saga actually has the issue of like things sitting in warehouses. You can buy a box of Dawn of History, which is the first set of Battle Spirit Saga, for around $20, which is at this point stores are selling them to like work towards breaking even. At this point, they aren't even breaking even. It's like a loss preventer, like really just to have more liquid to buy other products that they have more faith in at this point, right? So it's been a tough launch, and really, you know, I'm not quite sure how Bandai could have done the launch better. I think they want to bring it over because it's one of their proprietary like flagship games in Japan. I'm not sure how the ownership rights kind of shakes out in Japan, but I imagine that, you know, bringing over their flagship game they, you know, have all the rights to is typically a good move for business. But the issue is that Battle Spirit Saga is a well-designed game. It has good design fundamentals, but the issue is that it has the same high fantasy aesthetic like sorcery, like magic, like Flesh and Blood, like, you know, like, and so really in order to stand out, there needed to have been something else. And of course, comparing it over to One Piece and Dragon Ball and Digimon that have that IP brand recognizability already, and of course comparing it over to Disney, I feel like that, like being tied to an IP is like a cheat code to have your game sell more, like regardless of, you know, the quality of it or whatever. You know, it's just like, all right, well, you know, like some people, you know, aren't going to be here for like just straight up gameplay. Like having the recognizable characters is a huge draw to purchasing the product, and so having to carry itself just on the back of, you know, a lot of people in Japan playing it, which of course, you know, that's the opposite side of the world of us. And, you know, just trying to carry itself off of gameplay and like huge cash prizes. It feels like kind of like the Overwatch of trading card games, where like they try to draw people in that were playing Counter-Strike or other first-person shooters or something like that into Overwatch, just with like these huge cash prizes. And it seems to have backfired on them, unfortunately. But yeah, when it comes to Lorcana, don't fear the Bandai releases. Most of them have had similar issues, but I think Lorcana has a great IP back in it, and being able to sort out that supply issue is going to be great. I would hope for around MSRP. Again, I don't love the print into the ground notion because of reasons I've outlined before. But yeah, that's kind of my spiel about Bandai card games. Thanks for listening. I am stepping off the soapbox now.
I really think you bring up some excellent points. And that's kind of the main idea for this episode as we start to wrap things up. And that's, there is a fear, there's a very understandable fear that Lorcana could suffer some product shortages with set 2. It could happen. We don't know because we don't have the product in our hands. We don't know the availability. But I'm very much a historical and analytic, data-driven kind of person. And although we don't know the fate of Lorcana per se, we can look at other established games and show how their first year might have been a little rough, but they figured it out. The games have stabilized. The product is in people's hands. The price point is exactly where it's supposed to be, minus Battle Spirit Saga. That's the outlier.
Right.
But
whoops.
if people who are listening are patient and willing to wait, maybe you take a break and you come back. Whatever capacity works best for you, your hobby structure, your wallet, your lifestyle. There is a lot of hope that Lorcana will stabilize, and we don't have to fear that the game is dead, the game is unpurchasable, that speculators and collectors and pro players are going to drive it into the ground. I don't believe that for one bit. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know what the future looks like, but we have gone through multiple card games from multiple companies, and they all kind of share a similar thing. Their first couple sets were not great.
Yeah.
Just a factual thing.
Right.
I'm gonna chime in real quick as well and say that like what's really funny here is that, or I guess not even funny, is that like so I did business analytics in undergrad, and I don't even blame Ravensburger here for this launch because like one of the main principles of analytics and business and being able to predict demand and all this fun stuff is that like you need a data set, right? And so like Ravensburger was going to this like completely blind where it's like, you know, they saw the demand from D23, they probably tried to get some data from that, but it's like, how can you realistically print demand of a future product when you don't actually know how many people want the product, you know? And so I think it's important to emphasize here that like, while like the price and the landscape and the market of Lorcana is not ideal, it's also important to say that like I don't see a way that Ravensburger could have done it better unless they just magically guessed demand better than they did previously.
Time machine. Time machine is a viable option.
It's like they knew the game was going to be successful, but I think the big question on their mind was like, okay, so how successful are we talking here? And like that question was, it turns out to be the big one that's tough for many businesses, especially when they're printing this big new, IP, like kind of blockbuster trading card game. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Like this isn't meant as a critique because I definitely couldn't have done better. It's just a tough area all around.
Yeah, and to close out, I do think they also had that same thought process with the competitive circuit. I know we were all wondering why I didn't roll out with that initially, but if we're thinking from the same perspective, they're able to sort of beta test how people want to compete, who's going to show up, how do they want it to show up, what do they like, what do they not like, by seeing other people run events and then learn from that, because Ravensburger's never done this before. They've never had a competitive card game. Closest thing was Villainous, I guess, but like that's not as much of like a competitive scene as probably these other card games like Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, Magic. And so basically having this first two sets be an experiment of, hey, watch how people play, watch how people set up these tournaments, learn what they like and don't like, and then we'll roll ours out. I think that's probably what they were going for.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with you, and that's going to bring us to a close. So I'm really excited about Rise of the Floodborn. I think everyone here is really excited to see all the rest of the cards because the whole set hasn't been revealed. Excited to get our hands on some of these new cards, make upgrades and adjustments to our decks, try new things at locals. And I think the thing I'm most excited about for this new set is seeing new people come into Lorcana, be it people who started and maybe dropped off, people who never played it. I'm just really excited to like go to locals, see new faces, make new friends, and have some really cool memories and experiences with Rise of the Floodborn. So any last thoughts before we get on out of here, everybody?
Looking forward to set 2.
Same.
Peace.
Yep. All right. Well, then y'all can find us on social media at Twitter and Facebook at LorcanaCast, and we will see everyone next time. So remember, Ohana means family, which means nobody gets left behind and nobody gets forgotten.
Just